Robots Radio presents...
Today's chat is brought to you by, well, all of your support. Through the patronage you provide the Focus Fire chat team through Podbean's crowdfunding, we are able to provide you with the weekly podcast as well as the website and other aspects of Focus Fire chat. If you have any interest in becoming a patron of the FFC, please be sure to visit our website and click on the support link. Even a single dollar helps, and for those of you who are already patrons, thank you again for your generosity.
Welcome to Focus Fire Chat. Explore together.
Welcome to Focus Fire Chat, recorded on December 2nd, 2020. As always, I want to thank you for joining us once again. This week's episodes are going to be focused around exploring the Covenant. This particular episode will serve as what we have come to call the advanced session of the week's exploration. Congratulations to those who signed up for a deeper dive. Before we go any further, however, let's run through a quick introduction of who all is on the show. As always, this is your host, Blue Crew 86, and as always, with Halo, we have our good friend, as guest co-host, pensHALO. Pens, how are you doing tonight?
Doing well. You know, a little cross-eyed from trying to put the notes together because, you know...
Why? There's not like a dozen,
summary,
thousand pages of information.
A summary should not be 10 pages. But then again, you're talking about the Covenant, so how can it not be 10 pages?
Oh, man. All right, so last episode, or the first part of this week's episode, we talked kind of a general, like really big 50,000-foot view of who the Covenant are, of, you know, what the different species within the Covenant, their different positions, kind of like a very big general idea of their different positions. We had a little quick chat about how the Covenant tells the passage, or how they mark the passage of time, which I still think that's kind of cool. So for this one, I'm assuming we're going to start diving a little bit more into the weeds. We're going to take a journey, if you will. And I think you have here the Great Journey is this big thing with the Covenant. So what is this Great Journey?
So, again, the Covenant is all based upon, it's actually a religious organization. It's all based upon the worshiping of the Forerunners. But also at the key of it was this idea of the Great Journey. Essentially, the idea was, if they followed the path and whatnot, they would transcend existence and become gods. Early on, when the prophets had located the dreadnought and when the reformers had taken the dreadnought and had left, they had started researching the data that was there on the dreadnought. So they started translating the Forerunner terminals, and while they were doing the decoding of this, they came across information regarding the activation of the halo arrays. Now, again, this was the idea of a last resort weapon, of a last resort to stop the flood, where you would wipe out all life in the galaxy to starve the flood. However, as with most things, when you first come across something new and you're trying to decode it, your suppositions all are based upon that you've decoded it properly. This was not the case. In the research of...
Insert record scratch.
Yes.
What?
Yeah, so instead of seeing the activation of the halo ray as, we wiped everybody out to try to stop the flood, they read it as, we fired this ring, the rings were fired, and the Forerunners all transcended into gods. And this idea of locating the halo rings, activating them, and essentially becoming gods, ended up being the basis of their religion. This is what they sold to all the other species in their treaties, with this idea of, it didn't matter who you are, if you stayed true to the path, you would transcend this existence and become divine, much like the Forerunners were. So, with that note, and with that in mind, we'll kind of get started on the history of the covenant. Now, as I said early on, the split between the prophets, between the Stoics and the reformers, the Stoics and the reformists, for the prophets led to the reformists leaving, and they started making their way around to locate Forerunner. They had devices known as luminaries that could detect Forerunner relics, and they followed along to research it, to claim these Forerunner relics, to help advance them even further, with the idea of finding these rings to allow them to become divine. Well, in their search, in 938 BCE, the prophets encountered the elites. Initially, they just came to study the Forerunner artifacts that were found on St. Helios, because, again, there were Forerunner artifacts there. St. Heli knew they were there. And much like the Stoics, they were like, okay, we don't want to be heretics. We want to just worship these. We don't think they should be touched or damaged or interfered with in any way, even though they had some scientists that were doing it on the sly. So initially, they seemed to have some common ground, but because of the differences, much like what happened on Janjar Qom, fighting broke out for two different ideas. This is known as the War of Beginnings, and it lasted 86 years. The Sangheli had the advantage early on, being a warrior race and whatnot, but this got balanced out with the technology that the prophets had, and with the idea that it got things. So it kind of went back and forth in a deadlock. But the one thing the Sangheli could not counter was the dreadnought. They had nothing to stop that.
And this is not the dreadnought from Destiny. This is a different dreadnought.
Yes, this is the key ship, the one that you see leave High Charity at the end of Halo 2 and lands on Earth in Halo 3, lands in Halo 3. It lands on Earth and activates the portal. It's a triangular looking ship. It actually has a very sleek look to it, so it's actually very pretty. But during the war, the elites ended up violating their own beliefs to try to get some technological advantage, so they tried to get information to allow them to fight back. But as I said, they had no answer for the dreadnought. So it wasn't long after 86 years, they realized that if they kept going, both species would end up being annihilated. Because of this, and because the elites knew they had no answer for the dreadnought, they ended up surrendering. But the elites could respect the prophets because, despite the fact that they weren't warriors by nature, they fought very hard, and they used what they had. The prophets could respect the elites because they were a warrior case. They were a warrior culture, and they realized that they'd be better off as allies. So, in recognizing this, the writ of union was created, which allowed the two of them to become allies. This is actually the formal. This was in 852 BCE, and when essentially the covenant was created. Now, as I said in the previous episode, as with anything, there's nothing goes 100% smooth. For the longest time, the Sangheli was a very honor-bound race, and they helped serve as the military arm of the covenant. And the arbiter throughout this point in time was used in many cases to help fight other covenant, other races, to bring them into the fold, and also to help keep, soothe and unite the Sangheli. This all kind of came to a head in 2110 with the arbiter Fal Shavame. A traditional Sangheli, he actually refuted the covenant religion. He ended up being branded as a heretic, and his family was slain by another member of his clan, the Sangheili who slain them his name was Haka. The two faced off in a final fight, and they each slain each other in that final fight. Because of this, the Arbiter position, which once was a high honor for Sangheili, ended up becoming a position that only disgraced Sangheili would be offered as a way to regain their honor, usually at the expense of their own lives. As we see in Halo 2, Thel Vadume, the shipmaster who actually led the assault on Reach, and essentially the one who couldn't stop the Pillar of Autumn and couldn't stop Master Chief from blowing up the ring. Opening of Halo 2, he's put on trial and branded a heretic, literally branded, and then later on offered the position of Arbiter to try and regain the honor that he had lost. Excuse me. So there's the very beginning of the Covenant. At this point in time, the Huragok actually had already been brought in the Prophets. Not long after the Prophets left their homeworld, they had discovered a Forerunner M series class facility that had Huragok there. And pretty much for the only one that was really in a peaceful manner, they just kind of took the Huragok and allowed them to do their thing and translate the Forerunner to give them the information to the and to make just everything work better for the Covenant. So the actual next race that was brought in were actually the Lekgolo. This was in 784 BCE. The Covenant was searching for Forerunner relics, found what appeared to be a planet that had a bunch of them there. What they ended up finding were the Lekgolo colonies were eating the Forerunner facilities and essentially destroyed them. Again, this was seen as a massive heresy. An Arbiter was named at this point in time. Again, this is before Val Chavame, so the Arbiter was still a position of honor. The Sangheili sent an Arbiter to go and try to find a way to defeat the Lekgolo. It was during this that he found that it wasn't the entire Lekgolo society that destroyed. It was only some, and others avoided it. And it was thought that they could tame the Lekgolo, which is actually what this was actually called, the taming of the Lekgolo. Because they couldn't really defeat the Lekgolo on their own. So the elites essentially said, okay, fine. Either we stop fighting and you join us, or we nuke you into oblivion. So therefore, the Lekgolo then became allies. And again, they were actually the first ones to be brought into the Covenant. The next ones actually were the drones. This was in the year 1112. This is in the Common Era. They were discovered, and it ended up that the Prophets found a way to communicate with the drones, and they were incorporated into the Covenant by way of treaty. Again, they were initially brought in to be engineers, repairers, because they had hands that could be used to do repairs, and that's what they were brought in for. The next ones that were brought in were actually the Jackals and Skirmishers. This was in 1342. As with most of these, there was an initial conflict that initially really didn't go the way the Covenant wanted them to go. The Jackals, their homeworld is surrounded by a really dense asteroid field. So instead of doing straight up fighting, they would hide in the asteroid fields. This rendered the Covenant space power moot because they didn't know where to focus it. Again, negotiations were done. Peace was brokered between the two. And essentially, though, the other thing is the Jackals were actually brought in as mercenaries. Again, they were brought in. They were in charge of some shipping, but also they still kind of kept their pirating ways to harass UNSC fleets. That's what they did eventually, and to be the annoying snipers that we all know and hate. immensely.
They're really good.
Yeah, they don't miss. Okay. No. Frickin' Metropolis. The Grunts. Okay, the Grunts actually came in 2142. Initially, they were brought in to be laborers. They were just brought in. Weren't seen as very intelligent. They were just brought in to be the working class. However, when they were brought into High Charity, they had displaced the jackals out of their nests. Well, as payback, the jackal shipmasters ended up rendering grunt populations as infertile. And the Grunts did not take this well, so they actually rebelled.
This is when people realized, oh no, they have so many of them.
Mm-hmm. This was in 2462, and they proved that they could fight. Really, the only way that they stopped was because an arbiter was brought in to intervene. And they threatened to glass pensHALO and essentially wipe out the home planet. This ended up causing the rebellion was ended, but it also brought the Grunts into essentially the combat role for the Covenant. Again, still kind of like massive waves of troops, kind of a thing, but they ended up getting some more respect than they had before. So, and then the actual last one were the Brutes. They were actually brought in 2492. As in most cases, the Covenant was searching for Forerunner artifacts and came across their homeworld. The Brutes were in the middle of fighting a civil war, and Covenant show up. Some of the Brutes said, "Sure, you know what? You're obviously, essentially it's again survival of the fittest. Fittest was the Covenant, so a number joined. Those that were unwilling were pretty much defeated quickly through superior firepower and technology, and they ended up joining the Covenant anyway. So that's kind of a quick summary of the Covenant history and how it actually came together prior to the Human Covenant War in 2525.
Nice. And so let's take a break real quick, take a breather. And then we'll jump into the Human Covenant War. So yeah, we'll be right back.
Hey!
Hi!
Do you enjoy being optimistic about bad movies?
Or do you enjoy at least trying to figure out where someone worked really hard on a bad movie?
Well, we've got the podcast for you. New to Robots Radio, we represent Fresh Tomatoes, the movie podcast.
Each week, we look at 2 movies that did really badly critically, but we try to find the good in them.
And we have segments such as What Could Have Saved It, and Would You Watch It Again?
If you're there on a Saturday night, you want to watch a bad movie, but you're not sure if it's like good bad, or bad, or if you should even bother, give us a listen.
You can find us on Robots Radio, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever else you listen to podcasts.
Please come and say hi. We love you already.
Goodbye.
Okay, so now we're going to jump forward, about 50 years? 40 years?
They're about, yeah.
30 years? No, 30 years? 40 years? 25.
33 years.
Okay, cool. So 25 is when this whole shebang between humans and Covenant started for the first. Is this a first conflict? I mean,
yeah, this would actually be the first conflict between the human race and the Covenant races.
Okay.
In many cases, the previous the Covenant races, private, the elites, the prophets, even the brutes, in many cases, when they were repopulated back on to their planets, what ended up happening is they were removed as part of the conservation measure that the foreigners placed to try to save races before putting them back in after the firing of the Halo Ring. The difference was they were pretty much at the same technology level and knowledge when they were put back as when they were taken. Humans, however, were not. And this was touched in, I think, the last one, where humanity, because of the human Forerunner War, had actually been devolved to their pre-technology state, and it took them the normal, millennia to get back to the point where they were a spacefaring race. So by 2525, the humanity was again traveling the stars. They had settled both the inner and outer colonies, and at this point in time had populated over 800 worlds, if I remember correctly. So it ends up that it all starts with one ship known as the Minor Transgression. This was a Covenant missionary ship, actually crewed primarily by Magyar jackals, although there was a grunt deacon, which was the deacon was the lowest member of the Covenant religion, but yet the highest that a grunt could actually be in the religion. So yeah, and one Huragok by the name of Lighter Than Some.
It's so sad. He's
Please
just
pour one
trying to help.
So a human ship falls out of slip space because of a failed drive. The missionary ship comes across it, raids it. This would happen to be an unmanned ship. They of course find out where it's coming from, and they continue doing their raiding. The next ship, however, did actually have a pilot, and there was fighting with this. The human pilot by the name of Henry Gibson did fight against the intrusion, and actually had gained the upper hand on the Grunt Deacon. And at this point is probably one of the most ironic things that occurred in the Halo universe. The Huragok are a very peaceful race. They don't do violence at all. The Grunt Deacon by the name of Dadab had struck a friendship up with the Huragok, with Lighter Than Some, and to the point where the Huragok was showing Dadab some of the sign language that the Huragok used. Dadab tried showing a game to the Huragok where he would throw rocks and kill rats that are on the ship. The Huragoks don't like killing at all, so he didn't participate in it, but Henry Gibson got the edge on Dadab and was getting ready to kill him until he was struck by a rock thrown by Lighter Than Some. Of all the ironies, a war that would last over 50 years, destroy billions of lives, both in the Covenant and in humanity, started with a pacifist going against his beliefs to save his friend.
So sad.
So yeah, when I read that for the first time, I'm like, wait a minute. The first human death in the Human Covenant War was Henry Gibson from a Huragok throwing a rock.
Huragok.
Oh. So, ladies and gents, please take your time and pour one out for Lighter Than Some. Thank you. Okay. Sorry for that tangent.
It's like one of my favorite side stories with the Huragoks. It's like, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, let's face it. I know you. Your favorite character is Lighter Than Some.
Uh-huh. Yep.
I mean,
love it.
More than anything else, it's Lighter Than Some. I mean, Lighter Than Some has one of the most interesting stories overall. It goes into a ton of detail in Contact Harvest, which is a novel written by Joe Staton. I highly recommend it. Pick it up on your Kindle, Audible, whatever. It's definitely worth it.
It also has a really cool insight into Sarge as well.
Yes, it actually goes into the background of Avery Johnson, and it has the only sex scene in all of Halo.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Wow. Yep. Yeah, it does, doesn't it?
Yes.
Huh.
That was written kind of awkwardly.
I honestly didn't. Okay. I didn't even remember that until you said that.
Yeah.
But more importantly, it's got Lighter Than Some, and that's the only reason you need to worry about that book.
Yes. And there's a lot of really good things in that book, but yeah, Lighter Than Some is probably the story of Lighter Than Some, especially in the greater scheme of how everything started. It's definitely interesting. So after that point, becoming, Oni lays a trap. The Minor Transgression falls into that trap, and the only only beings that are able to get away are Dadab and Lighter Than Some, and they're picked up by the ship Rapid Conversion. This is a ship that's been being crewed actually by brutes. Um, and the luminary there ends up leading the Covenant to Harvest. This is the human world that most of the ships that the minor transgression were raiding came from. So I mentioned the term luminary. This is a device that the Covenant used to search for and locate Forerunner relics and artifacts. The reason that they ended up going to Harvest was because a large number of Forerunner relics and artifacts were found there, or identified there. Now, upon seeing this information was sent back to High Charity. At the same time, on High Charity, 2 prophet bureaucrats were scheming to introduce a new age of reclamation, with themselves as hierarchs on the High Council. Essentially, these were guys who were trying to make a power play and gain power. They were the Minister of Fortitude, otherwise known as Ord Casto, and the Vice Minister of Tranquility, otherwise known as Log Moran. Now, as I mentioned in the intro episode, the way that the religion was based was to do this, they needed the blessing of the Oracle, which meant, now again, this was the fragment of Mendicant Bias on the key ship. Now, however, because the Oracle Mendicant Bias had been inactive, that meant that they had to convince the philologist to essentially say, yes, the Oracle's naming these 2 as high prophets. This philologist was by the name of Hod Rumpt. So they're meeting there in the key ship to discuss their plans and the offers and whatnot when the information from Rapid Conversion was delivered. A long-dormant oracle awakes, meaning Mendicant Bias finally woke up. During this...
Which was not part of their original plan.
No, this actually stunned everybody, because the oracle had never spoken before, even though they said the oracle had spoken before. You know, religion, go figure. Sorry, that's... slightly flawed.
Opinions expressed on this show do not...
Yeah. I shouldn't say no. It's the worst aspects of it,
right?
You know,
well, and this is undercut by the political maneuvers that these prophets are trying to pull off.
So my apologies for anyone. I didn't mean to insult anyone. I'm speaking mainly specifically on the Halo. I'm speaking on the Halo front on this altogether. So yeah. Okay, so I'm going to stop digging myself into a hole, and we're going to move forward here. So like I said, this actually stunned everybody. They hadn't really realized that this was the case. And it was at this point in time that Mendicant Bias reported to the 3 prophets that they actually weren't reading the Forerunner symbols correctly, that the relics weren't relics, they were actually humans. And they called the humans reclaimers, and that they were his makers. Now, at this point, the prophets, specifically Ord Casto, incorrectly thought that the humans were actually living Forerunners that were left behind after the firing of the Halo rings. Now, what Mendicant Bias wanted to do is, because he was still trying to make amends for everything that happened with the flood with the Forerunners, he wanted to take the Dreadnought to go to Harvest, pick up the humans, and then take them to the Ark. To essentially allow them to reclaim the glory that was, or claim everything that the Forerunners had.
Well, and also, wasn't that also part of taking up the mantle?
Yes, because the Forerunner, the mantle responsibility was actually, which the Forerunners had, and they essentially failed at, was to pass to humanity. But as Mendicant Bias was spinning everything up, the prophets essentially sent the glowworms in and had them disable the conduits that would allow the ship to leave. So at this point in time, Mendicant Bias and the key ship can't leave, and so they're now left with this of, all this new information is like, so everything we thought really isn't the case. And it was the Fortitude that stated that if the remainder of the government learned of this, they would probably rebel because it would undercut everything that their religion was based upon. So, what the three decided to do...
Surprise!
Yeah. They said, nope, we're going to go ahead with our plan. And essentially, the philologist announced that the oracle had spoken and had named Fortitude, Tranquility, and the philologist as the new high prophets. They took the names Truth, Regret, and Mercy. Truth essentially being the leader, Regret being the young hothead, and Mercy being the old dude. So they took power, and essentially said, and again, they're the high prophets, and whatever they said went. They then announced that the humans had destroyed the Forerunner relics on Harvest, and as such, as punishment for their heresy, they were to be eradicated. So this leads to the conflict at Harvest, which the initial assault from the Covenant on Harvest, the response for the militia, and how they were able to, at this point, disable the rapid conversion using the planet's mass driver cannon, which allowed a number of the planet to escape. The rapid conversion was replaced by another Covenant super destroyer, where the scout ship Argo was sent to Harvest. That was actually destroyed by the rapid conversion. The rapid conversion was replaced by a Covenant super destroyer. The UNSC sent a hastily put together fleet out to Harvest, of which only one ship came back, the Heracles, to report that, and essentially pretty much said in English that the destruction of the human race was the will of their gods, and they were the instrument. So again, this is where the Covenant would then use their luminaries to detect human worlds and would start destroying them. The primary way they would do this is that they would glass them. What this is a plasma bombardment from space by Covenant ships. Once they would go ahead and they would assault the planet, retrieve whatever they wanted to retrieve, they would then retreat, and then the ships would then activate their glassing beams and start to crisscross the entire planet until the entire planet was glass.
And those planets have really bad records.
Yes. Now, throughout this, there were some elites that wondered why humanity was not given a chance to join the Covenant. And throughout the early years, the UNSC really didn't have much of a... they discovered that they needed at least 3-to-1 odds to defeat the Covenant, mainly because the shielding was significantly better. The Covenant could do pinpoint slip space jumps inside of systems, which the UNSC could not do. It was at this point in time that Preston J. Cole came to be known as the hero of the UNSC prior to the Spartans. He led a number of fights against the Covenant with a massive fleet, and defeated the Covenants in space, which was exceedingly rare to do, until his supposed death at the Battle of Serpentis. But this continued on slowly as the UNSC had gotten to the point where, with the use of the Spartans, they could actually hold their own against the ground assaults, and even punch back a bit. But when it came to space, the UNSC just could not keep pace. There were some victories here and there, but there really weren't that many. One of the notable ones was Sigma Octantis 4, and that was Jacob Keyes when he took out 2 destroyers, a cruiser, and drove off an assault carrier. So like I said, pretty much it was at this point after Harvest, it was kind of downhill for humanity. They had some good spots up until, and the Covenant had the UNSC on the ropes. And also, as part of this was the introduction of the Cole Protocol for the UNSC. This was written by Preston J. Cole, and it pretty much said that the Covenant were never, could not find where Earth was. if it looked like something was going to be captured, the order was to self-destruct and destroy your nav data. Ships could not, like, if they had to make jumps, they had to jump away at a random vector. They definitely could not jump in a straight line back to Earth or any major planet. It's also in 2552, after 20 some years, the Reach was found. That's one of the major world's military bases used by the UNSC. Again, Halo Reach, that fight. So it kind of went this way up until 2552, when the Prophet of Regret took a fleet and made a jump, and actually mistakenly found Earth and assaulted Earth, essentially and located the portal at Voy. Again, this is the events of Halo 2 and Halo ODST. After an assault by Spartan 117 in the UNSC, he jumps out and they find another Halo ring, and it's on this Halo ring that Master Chief kills the Prophet of Regret in one of the most pain in the butt fights in the game.
What could possibly go wrong with a guy in a hover chair in the middle of an open room?
Yes, with
elites who can one-shot you.
With elite honor guards and the plasma cannons that he had in the arms of his chair, and how you couldn't shoot him. You had to jump on the chair, punch him a few times, jump off, and then do it again. I think on Legendary you had to hit him like 20 some times.
Oh yeah, Legendary
was ridiculous.
Legendary was just
So at that point, with his death, came what was known as the Great Schism. The prophets had started to think that the elites were not the most loyal to them, and in this, because of the failures that the elites had, the destruction of the original Halo ring, the death of Regret, the brutes were actually given the place that the elites held. They were in charge of the fleets. They became the honor guard for the prophets. And what Truth actually did was gave orders to purge the elites from the Covenant. This essentially started a civil war. Again, it was known as Great Schism. The elites, led by the Arbiter Thel 'Vadam and Shipmaster Artas 'Vadum, fought back against the Covenant. They ended up being joined by other races like Golo, grunts. So they found allies to fight against the Covenant, and eventually allied with humanity to fight against them. So, which culminated all in Halo 3.
And we're going to take a quick break to give brains a break.
Are you an avid player of the Elder Scrolls Online and looking to take your game to that next level? Well, the Red Diamond Courier podcast is here to help. I'm Bob Chichinski.
And I'm Dogbark24.
We are two experienced players aiming to help others learn and improve through in-game knowledge and references.
From PvE
to PvP
and everything in between.
There's sure to be something for you in the Red Diamond Courier.
We hope you check us out. Thanks.
Okay, so
wow.
In Halo 3,
yeah,
we're picking up the pieces from this Great Schism, which really, I think, shook the Covenant. It seems.
Yeah.
And honestly, I would almost say the Great Schism was maybe a catalyst that would eventually lead to the Covenant at least restructuring significantly, if not breaking up entirely, depending on how you want to look at it.
The Great Schism, which actually, I'm sorry, that was actually in Halo 2.
Right. Sorry, yeah, but Halo 3 is yeah.
When you get into Halo 3, this is where you see the Sangheili teaming up with humanity to defeat the Covenant.
Correct.
This is Regret and Mercy both die in Halo 2, which leaves Truth to be the only prophet left. He takes a fleet, comes to Earth. At the end of Halo 2, Truth gets aboard the key ship and abandons High Charity. That key ship makes its way to Voy. It lands, and it goes ahead and it activates the portal that the Forerunners place there. This portal opens up and essentially leads the Sangheili to the Ark. This is where all the Halo rings could be fired. And the other thing you have to remember about this is the Flood is also present at this time, making things even more interesting. But in the end, the Arbiter is the Halo rings are about to be fired, but the Arbiter, along with help from Master Chief, is able to slay the Truth and stop him from doing so. So, and then after that, it was just defeating the Flood and initiating a firing sequence on Installation 08, which was the Halo ring created once Installation 04 was destroyed as its replacement. It wasn't fully done, but it was able to be fired to wipe out the Flood that was on the Ark. Then you have the end of Halo 3, where Arbiter and Chief get aboard the Forward Unto Dawn. It ends up getting split in two in slipspace. When the slipspace portal actually collapses, the Arbiter is able to return back to Earth. Master Chief is left floating in space. At this point in time, this is the end of the Covenant as it was originally constituted. Now, with any organization like that, once its leaders fall, it usually starts to splinter. So in the post-war, we start seeing a number of numerous remnants appear. Some large, some small, some are offshoots of these offshoots, but these are the primary ones that appear in the Halo universe. The first are the Swords of Sanghelios. This is a group loyal to Thelvadam, the Arbiter. It's primarily Sangheili, although there are grunts and I think some Kigyar and like Golo that are there. They seek to have peace with humanity. Now, in addition to abandoning the Covenant religion, they also kind of abandoned the traditional Sangheili beliefs that the Forerunners were gods and that the technology should not be used. The swords were practical. Again, you have to remember that Sangheili society up until this point was very patriarchal, but under the swords was the first time you saw females actually get positions of command inside of the military. You actually see this in Halo 5, and it's actually specifically mentioned when Fire Team Osiris arrives on Sanghelios. In opposition to the swords is the Servants of Abiding Truth. This is led by the Sangheili, a former Sangheili general by the name of Avu Med Telkam. He was very much a traditionalist, as in what the Sangheilis believed prior to joining the Covenant. And while they did not like the Covenant, they did not like the fact that Thelvadam was abandoning the traditional beliefs now that they were free of the Covenant. It is these two are the two major factors, or major opposing sides on Sanghelios. And actually, Oni worked to foment a civil war between the two to keep them fighting each other instead of turning on humanity. Next, you have the Keepers of the One Freedom. This was led by the brute chieftain Castor, and actually, this group actually held on to the original Covenant beliefs, the belief in the Great Journey, the belief of transcending from your current status to godhood. The other differences is they actually allowed humans to join their group, and also they work with humans. Their capital is on the planet Venezia, and they actually have allies on the planet Gao, which is actually featured in a a couple of books. They had some large Forerunner facilities there. A life worker, Hergok, was at that location as well. And actually, Gao was also a central, also the location of some insurrectionists as well, which started cropping up after the war completed. At this time, as of 2559, the Keepers actually are allied with the Banished. They were on reach to try to help locate the information for the Forerunner portal. At last note, the Keepers were actually on their way to the Ark.
Dun dun dun.
To possibly see about following through on their religious beliefs. Then we have the Banished. And I know we've kind of covered the Banished before. So real quick, they're led by Atriox and another war chieftain by the name of Isharam. They were formed by Atriox after he became disillusioned with the Covenant, specifically after being sent to with 39 other of his packmates to be thrown against UNSC lines, and he was the only one who ever came back. The Covenant just tried to kill him. They thought that he would be too much of a huge rallying point against the Covenant, and
they were right.
Yeah. The Banished are not religious at all, and it actually was the earliest of all these splinter groups. It was formed while the Covenant was still kind of at the height of their power, and they raided everybody. They raided the Covenant. They raided the UNSC.
Yeah, they were very non-discriminatory against who they took on, and
they're a pretty fearsome force too.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last one that we come across in game is actually Jul-Mdama's Covenant.
Who's that?
Jul-Mdama was originally a member of the Servants of the Abiding Truth. Now the thing is that he disliked the Covenant. He did not like Thelvadam, but he really wasn't that religious. It ended up that he was the one who found that Oni was trying to push a civil war between elites, which and it was that civil war that caused his wife to be killed. This led him. He kind of used the concept of religion to draw people to his side, even though he didn't believe it. And his main goal was to enter the Shield World Requiem and ally with the Didact to take power, since both really disliked humanity. Those are the pretty much major ones. There are, like I said, there are other ones. There was a splinter group from Jul-Mdama's Covenant that he ruthlessly stomped out, and a number of others. But those are the kind of like the major ones of that are present in the Halo universe at this time.
Yeah, and I think, like, to kind of wrap it up as much as possible, because this is such, like, I mean, this topic is, it's immense, like, as with any topic that I feel like we try to tackle. But like the big focus seems to be going to be on the Banished, going into Infinite at least.
Yeah.
Because
that
like the whole
is going to be it.
Because like Sword of St. Helios and was it the not
Keepers
the servants, the keep? Yeah, what?
Keepers,
no, Keepers was Keepers Halo 5. Was the Keepers the ones that did the bombing in Nightfall?
I can't remember if that was the Keepers or not. It may have been.
Because I can't.
That might have been the Servants of the Abiding Truth.
Yeah, it might have been. Yeah, so but I mean, like, the swords were definitely prevalent in Halo 5.
Mm-hmm.
Jul-Mdama was what, Halo 4?
Halo 4 Spartan Ops.
Spartan Ops, that's right. And so the Banish seems to be really the focus, which I'm actually really excited to see where they're going to go with the Banished. But that being said, just again, big thanks for Pens putting together, what is this, like, over 10 pages of notes on
and
on
I know I've with any summary of these kind of topics, it's like I could get drilled down into minutia. So there's stuff that that some people pick up that go, well, that I missed, and they'd be totally right.
Yeah, but I mean, but that
it's
also
a lot of information, and
right.
So, but yeah,
I mean, that's like talking about anything. Like anything that has been well thought out and presented in the way that, you know, honestly, the Halo universe has to this point been. There's so many things that have been very ironed out as far as details, and it's both the beauty of it and it's also the bane of it, because talking about it, you have to have, I mean, it's like the conversation about Halsey, right? Everything comes back to Halsey.
Yeah.
So if you hate Halsey, you're going to get upset eventually because it's going to come back to that character.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's just the facet of one of the central characters being that character. And so, you know, I think, again, I would reiterate like what you were saying in the intro session. Huge shout out to Halopedia. Halopedia is one of those sites that just, it makes doing not just research but also just brushing up on, you know, who are these people, it makes it a lot easier. It's not that it's going to be super easy, but it will make it a lot more streamlined. It'll point out the different, you know, resources and all the different, you know, source material that you really want to look at. Pens, I don't know. Do you have any last thoughts on the Covenant before we sign off?
The Covenant was and is a very interesting opponent in the Halo games, and they're really well thought out and put together, and they really have a lot of really unique characters in it. Not gonna lie, putting together all that information is kind of it was daunting. It's definitely interesting though. You know, this information isn't all just in one book. There's it's spread throughout all the novels and all the other lore, but it's definitely an interesting one. And you know, if you're looking for just probably the best summary, Halopedia will have it. And there are a number of other content creators in Halo who have done excellent videos on the Covenant. Halo Canon Installation 00, just to name a couple. And then, you know, podcasts like Podcast Evolved and whatnot, who've done amazing, and Forward Unto Dawn, who've done amazing jobs with getting deeper into it. But overall, I just want to take the time to say, you know, thanks again for having me on. For everyone who's listening to this, you know, thank you for taking the time to listen to my insane ramblings. I do appreciate it, and I appreciate given the opportunity to come on and talk about something that I really enjoy, and I really love the Halo universe. So
definitely, I mean, I love learning more about it, and I feel like, you know, I know we've gotten messages about this, but I feel like every time we have you on, we always learn something new, and that's really, you know, that's why we keep having you back. That, and it's just enjoyable as all hell. But that all being said, as usual, I want to thank you for your time, and until next time, remember, with wisdom we conquer. Stand strong, stand tall, and keep exploring. With that, we'll begin to wrap the chat up. Thank you again to those over on Twitch for coming to spend your evening with us. If you'd like to join us for the live streaming of the episodes, please be sure to give us a follow over on twitch.tv/FocusedFireChat. Links to all our episode archives can be found at www.thelorenetwork.com. Please be sure to email us at focusedfirechat@gmail.com with any comments and or questions for the team concerning the podcast, and let us know how we're doing by giving us some feedback and a rating over on iTunes as well. So until next time, focus your fire and may your light shine bright.